Wow. Oh, such great energy in here this morning. We're going to be talking about learning lasting joy. Lasting joy. Because you know what I realized? Joy is a slippery little sucker. You know? It's like, dang. 1 minute it's feeling good and strong and you got it, and the next minute it's like, bam, where'd it go? You know? We get all lifted and shifted and empowered in here, and then we get in our car and our kid says something, our partner says something, and we're like, oh God, where'd the joy go? Or we go on the 405 and we're like, oh God, where did the joy go? That's how it feels sometimes. It's like, it's so elusive. But it's so essential to who we are. And so I had the absolute privilege of reading this book, The Book of Joy, by His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu, two of the greatest spiritual leaders and teachers alive right now. And they share their journey and their experience and their joy. Their joy. And so I think it's really helpful to, or at least I think it's a lot easier to learn something from someone who's been through what you've been through, right? Mm-hmm. There's a little bit more credibility. And so we've got one of the men in exile from his country, and the other one had to deal with apartheid, right? So I think like they know a little something. If they're living in joy right now, then maybe we can learn something from them. But first, I wanted to share this pun that I heard with you because I thought it was so silly and funny. Tell me if you get it, okay? So, what did the Buddhist say to the hot dog vendor? Make me one with everything. I learned that at teen camp. But it's kind of funny because, you know, Buddhists, well, but anyway, so learning lasting joy. We're going to talk about 3 different parts of this. First, we're going to talk about the nature of true joy. And then we're going to talk about the obstacles to joy. Because for anyone of us in here who's actually human, we know that there are obstacles to joy, to lasting joy. And then we'll look at the 8 pillars of joy. So let's check this out. The nature of true joy. I realize that, myself included, that so many of us, we look for joy in the things that like instantly bring us joy, right? Like money, success, degrees, cars, houses, you know? And we work really, really hard. We work really, really hard at a job that we might not even really enjoy because we think it's a means to joy. Right? Or relationships. When we're in that relationship, then we're going to feel joy. And so we go and we hassle around with all these dating websites and we're not in joy at all, you know? And there's all these different areas of our life that we spend so much of our time just focusing on because we think it's a means to joy. But I know that we all probably get this. Joy can't be found, not lasting joy, in the material world. Where can it be found? Within us, yes. That's the obvious answer, but it's also like the cold, hard truth. Because sometimes working really, really, really hard and the blood, sweat, and tears that goes into a career or an education or whatever it is in our lives is a heck of a lot easier than diving into those vast recesses of the foreign unknowns within us, you know? It's scary in there sometimes. And so we hide away. We're like, I'll just work 80 hours this week, and then I'll have a big paycheck. Then I'll have a little bit of joy at least, right? Until it's all gone, and then we have to do it again. But the only place where true joy can come from is our inner environment, our inner spaces. It's the atmosphere that we create within ourselves. It's about our values. And then it becomes about our relationships. Our relationship to ourselves, our relationship to others. Think about this for a minute. How would it feel to be generous and compassionate and empathetic with yourself? Wouldn't that feel good? That's lasting joy. And so the Dalai Lama says this. He says, "The problem is that our world and our education remain focused exclusively on the external, materialistic values. We are not concerned enough with our inner values. Those who grow up with this kind of education live a materialistic life, and then eventually the whole society becomes materialistic. But this culture is not sufficient to tackle our human problems. The real problem is here," the Dalai Lama says. And the Archbishop nods, and he also taps his chest. He says, "Here too, yes, the mind and the heart." Materialistic values cannot give us peace of mind or joy, so we really need to focus on our inner values, our true humanity. And so the nature of true joy comes from when we recognize that oneness, that wait, we are one of 7 billion family members on this planet that we call home. And when we take care of ourselves, we create internal space, we can create an environment about ourselves that then can be sufficient to support others. And so that's the nature of true joy. It's that inner realm. It's that realm of power and potential within us. And so then we look at the obstacles. God, there's so many obstacles, aren't there? Everywhere we turn, all of a sudden our joy is getting thrown out the window. And why can't we hold on to it? What are these obstacles? And before we get into the actual obstacles, I wanted to share with you the experiences that these two spiritual leaders have been through, just to remind us that, yeah, there is suffering in the world, and yeah, it can be pretty brutal, and yeah, we can feel a lot of pain, and paradoxically, and we can also have lasting joy within us simultaneously. And so the Dalai Lama, he's the 14th Dalai Lama, His Holiness, and he comes from Tibet. And in 1950, the Chinese government and the Tibetan government tried to negotiate a way to have peace between them. And those negotiations went very wrong. And China invaded Tibet, murdering, savagely killing hundreds of thousands of Tibetan Buddhists. And the ones who surrendered were forced into obeying the Chinese government and thereby relinquishing their Buddhist ways. And the Dalai Lama himself, he was in exile from his country. He had nowhere to go. He wasn't allowed to go back to where he came from. And so thankfully, India was like, we'll take you, you could be a refugee over here. And so he's lived in exile there for the rest of his life, hearing about and knowing that his people and his faith is being ripped apart and tore apart all the time. And then we have the Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who is not only one of South Africa's most well-known human rights activists, but one of the greatest spiritual teachers in the world right now. He won a Nobel Peace Prize for his work in resolving the apartheid. And for those of you who are too young or maybe too old to remember what apartheid was, it is this horrible experience of segregation where people are abused, they're neglected, some are poisoned, they're killed, they're murdered, they're not given any water. Generations and generations of people had to experience this all because of the color of their skin. And so Archbishop Tutu used nonviolent, peaceful ways to resolve this and start the healing process over there. And so these two men, they know a little bit about suffering. They know a little bit about watching people they love die. They know a little bit about the pain and anguish that life can hold. And yet there's not a moment in this book when you don't feel their essence is joy, when you don't feel that who they are is a human being with a smile on their face because they get it. They get that there's obstacles, they get that there's emotions. And so what they become to us is they become an example. They become a great example of what is possible. Because many of us, we might be going through something. Maybe we've gone through something worse than them. And maybe we don't realize or know how we're ever going to have joy in our lives again. But these people give us hope, a possibility that yes, although there is terrible suffering and pain in the world, that there is a possibility, and not only a possibility, but a probability of learning lasting joy in your life. The Dalai Lama says that in order to overcome our obstacles to joy, we have to do something. We have to create like a mental immunity. Just like we create this physical immunity so that when we do get a virus and we do get bacteria, that we become sick for a little bit, but it lessens each time because we've built up this immunity. In the same way, we built this mental immunity, kind of like the divine dumbbells I talked about a few weeks ago. We build up this muscle, this spiritual muscle, so that when we do get slammed with grief, we do get slammed with losing our job or our partner leaving us or just feeling despair for no reason or terrible anxiety, that yeah, we'll feel it, but it'll lessen and it'll lessen and it'll lessen as we develop this mental immunity. And what I loved so much, you guys, is how relevant that was to our faith that I love so much. Isn't that what we do here? We develop a mental immunity. Listen, people, this is so fabulous. We believe in a power for good greater than we are that we can use. We believe in a divine intelligence that created everything, and it creates us too. And we believe in a creative process that allows us to create our lives. And the creative process is as simple as this. What we think and what we feel, coupled together, create. That's it. What we think and what we feel, coupled together, create. What are we creating? What are we creating? When we become aware of our thoughts, and we become aware of our feelings, and we bring them together, and we meld them together in a way that serves and supports instead of diminishes us, then we're learning to overcome those obstacles. We're learning what lasting joy really is. And the Archbishop, he's so sweet and kind. He says so lovingly, when asked about our obstacles to joy, he says, I think we've got to accept ourselves where we are and then hope to grow. I mean, getting to know what it is that triggers us. There are things that you can train. These are the things that you can train. You can change, but we ought not be ashamed of ourselves right here and now. We ought not be ashamed of ourselves. We are human, and sometimes it is a good thing that we recognize that we have human emotions. And so some of the obstacles to joy probably aren't what you think they are. They're not anger, they're not frustration, they're not fear, they're not sadness or grief, they're not depression or anxiety. These are not obstacles to fear. These are human emotions that everyone is going to have. They're human emotions. Our obstacle to joy, to true lasting joy, is in our false beliefs about ourselves. It's in us thinking that we should be feeling something else other than what we are. It's in us thinking that we should be somewhere other than we are, or that we should be someone other than we are. That somehow there's more or a better way to be, and that we're not it right now. That's our obstacle. If we could just take a moment and get right with ourselves and get quiet and listen and feel and realize that we are more than matter. We are more than our bank accounts. We are more than our degrees. We're more than our goals. We are the divine in action. We are the means by which God glorifies itself on earth. We are the eyes and the ears and the compassion of this almighty spirit for good. And we're the only way that it gets out. And how can it get out when we're obstructed by thinking that we shouldn't be feeling a little sadness, or we shouldn't be feeling a little grief, or we shouldn't be feeling this, or we shouldn't be looking like that, or we shouldn't be here or there, or not having enough of this or that? We are enough. We are enough right here and now. We can never be more enough than we are right now. That's it. We're enough. I love that. And so that brings us to the 8 pillars of joy. The 8 pillars of joy. And like they had said in the beginning about the heart and the mind, 4 of these pillars come from the heart and 4 come from the mind. And so the interesting thing that the Archbishop and the Dalai Lama realized together was that joy is actually a byproduct. It's actually a byproduct of all of that creating your inner environment, of all of the generosity and the compassion and the perspective that you can hold. And the Archbishop said something funny. He goes, when people say to you, I want to be happy and I want to be joyful, while they're clenching their teeth with determination, they probably missed the bus. And I thought that was funny. Do you ever remember trying to sit down and meditate and you're like, oh, this isn't working? Or like, I'm really happy, I'm thinking positively, right? Like, I'm not sick, even though you've got a fever, right? So joy is really a byproduct. And so I want to share with you the 8 pillars of joy with just a little excerpt of what they thought about it. So the first pillar of joy is perspective. It's perspective, and it's our ability to reframe our situation more positively. That's the first pillar of lasting joy. And the second is humility. And the Dalai Lama always says this, you probably know this, he always says, I'm just one of 7 billion people on this planet. I'm nothing more, I'm nothing less. I'm equal to everyone. And the third one, I love this one, the third pillar to lasting joy is laughter, it's humor. They say that laughter is the most direct line between any 2 people. And certainly the Dalai Lama and the Archbishop used humor to break down the social barriers that separated them. Humor, like humility, comes from the root word for humanity. And so in our humor, we find our humanity. And then acceptance. Acceptance is the 4th pillar of joy. And the Dalai Lama says something like this. He says, why be unhappy about something if it can be remedied? And what is the use of being unhappy if it can't be remedied? Right? So it's like, why get frustrated if you can't do anything about it? And why get frustrated if you can do something about it, right? Because it'll change or it won't change. I like that. The 5th one is forgiveness. Forgiveness, the Dalai Lama said, does not mean that we forget. You should remember the negative thing, but because there is a possibility to develop hatred, we mustn't allow ourselves to be led down that direction. We must choose to forgive. And the 6th pillar is gratitude. Every day, think as you wake up, I am fortunate to be alive. I have a precious human life, and I'm not going to waste it. You want to say that with me? Yeah. I am fortunate to be alive. I have a precious human life, and I am not going to waste it. Yeah, I like that. And the 7th is compassion. Compassion. On this planet, over the last 3,000 years, different religious traditions developed. And these traditions carry the same message, the message of love. So the purpose of these different traditions is to promote and strengthen the value or virtue of love, which is compassion. And then the 8th pillar of joy is generosity. And the Archbishop says about his Bible, our book says that it is in giving that we receive. So I would hope that people would recognize in themselves that it is when we are closed on ourselves that we tend to be miserable. It is when we grow in self-forgetfulness, in a remarkable way, we discover that we are filled with joy. And what's really fascinating to me is that these are all those 8 pillars. We know that. We've heard it, right? We've even practiced it. But are we on a regular basis? Are we taking time out daily? Are we doing daily spiritual practice? Are we using these 8 pillars and infusing them into who we are? Are we taking time to look inward daily, momentarily? I know it's work, guys, but it doesn't have to be hard. It is work, it's discipline. But this is where that true, lasting joy comes from. It comes from that mental muscle. So I want to practice with you all for just a moment. We're just going to do one of the simplest spiritual practices, which is breathing. And so I want to invite you to just close your eyes and center yourself. And we're going to take 3 big, deep breaths in through our nose, filling up our belly like a balloon, and then exhaling through our mouth. Ready? In, out. In, out. In, out. And just being in this moment, being in these breaths, being present to our bodies, it feels so sacred. It feels so rich and alive with life. It reminds us that our internal world isn't so scary, especially when it just starts with a breath. And so I want to pray right now. I want to pray. I feel the Spirit flowing through me and through each and every one of us here. I can feel it in this room, that there is a divine presence, a holy, sacred presence that is right here within the midst of all of us. It is the seed, it is that flame, like Browning says, that never can be extinguished. And it is that lifts our life, that fuels our life, that fires us up inside, and it reminds us that we are enough. We are enough, and that we have the capacity and probability of feeling extreme, everlasting joy. Coupling that with all the natural human emotions that we will go through, I affirm and declare right here and now that our lives are good, they are lifted. We are the beloved's beloved. We are the children of the Most High, lifted into that light, covered and smeared with good and more good. And it bursts out of every one of us today. And it goes out into the world, and it makes it a brighter, better place. And for this, I am so very grateful. And I say, yes, thank you, Spirit. Yes to that law that says yes to me. And so it is. So it is.